The great meeting hall on Station Alpha 7 stretched for nearly a mile. Its walls were made of clear metal that showed the stars beyond. Inside, thousands of different creatures sat in groups based on what kind of air they breathed and what temperature they needed to stay alive. The Galactic Council had been meeting here for 3,000 years. In all that time, the different species had learned to work together, but they did not like each other. The snake-like centaur would not share their breathing machines with the fish-like Delphians. The crystal beings called resonance thought all soft-bodied creatures were stupid and dirty. But then humans had arrived 200 years ago, and everything changed. Elena Vasquez walked through the main corridor of the station. She was the human ambassador, and everywhere she went, aliens stopped to talk with her. A group of Delphians swam up to their tank wall to wave their tentacles at her. 3 Centaur nodded their snake heads in respect. Even a resonant chimed a musical greeting as she passed. Elena smiled at all of them. This was normal for her. She had been working here for 15 years, and she loved her job. She helped different species talk to each other when they had problems. She found ways for them to trade goods and share knowledge. Most importantly, she helped them understand that being different did not mean being enemies. The other species found this strange about humans. Where other aliens saw differences that made them angry or afraid, humans saw interesting new ways of thinking. When the crab-like Chitauri and the bird-like Aviari had fought a war over mining rights, Elena had spent 6 months working with both sides. She learned their languages, studied their cultures, and found a solution that made both groups happy. This kind of thing happened all the time. Humans were the only species that could work with everyone else. They did not care if someone had scales, feathers, or was made of living crystal. They treated all beings with respect and kindness. Elena reached her office and sat down at her desk. Today she had to solve 3 different problems. The thermal pods wanted to build a new factory on a planet that the gas breathers considered sacred. 2 trading companies owned by different species were fighting over cargo routes, and a group of mixed-species scientists needed help working together on a new project. These problems would have caused wars in the past. Before humans joined the Council, species fought over every disagreement. Planets were destroyed. Billions died. The galaxy was always on the edge of chaos. Now, humans stepped in to help solve these fights before they got too big. Elena and the other human ambassadors worked day and night to keep peace between the different species. They were like oil in a machine, helping all the parts work together smoothly. Elena started with the sacred planet problem. She called both species to her office. The thermal pods were large, rock-like beings who needed very hot temperatures. They spoke by changing the color of their skin. The gas breathers were thin, floating creatures who lived in the atmosphere of gas giant planets. They talked by releasing different, scented chemicals. Most species found it impossible to communicate with beings so different from themselves. But Elena had learned both methods. She watched the color patterns on the Sinzens, thermal pod leader's skin while breathing in the scent. Messages from the gas breather representative. The factory will bring jobs and wealth, the thermal pod leader said through red and orange flashes. The sacred winds of our ancestors flow through those mountain peaks. The gas breather replied with a smell like flowers, mixed with metal. Elena nodded to both of them. I understand both of your concerns, she said. What if we found a way to honor the sacred mountains while still building the factory? She spent 4 hours with them, asking questions and suggesting ideas. Finally, they agreed to build the factory in a valley near the mountains, with special towers that would let the sacred winds flow through the building. The gas breathers would work in the factory alongside the thermal pods, sharing their knowledge of atmospheric science. When they left her office, both species were happy. They even shook hands, tentacle to stone finger, which would have been impossible before. Elena moved on to the next problem. The trading companies were owned by the insect-like buzzwings and the plant-like root singers. They both wanted to use the same shipping routes to deliver goods across the galaxy. In the past, this would have led to attacks on cargo ships and maybe even a trade war. Elena called the company leaders and suggested something new. What if they shared the routes? The buzzwings were faster at loading and unloading cargo, but the root singers were better at finding efficient paths through space. Working together, they could deliver goods faster and cheaper than either could alone. At first, both sides said no. The buzzwings did not trust the slow-moving root singers. The root singers thought the quick buzzwings were too aggressive. But Elena kept talking with them, showing them charts and data that proved cooperation would help both companies make more money. Finally, they agreed to try working together for 6 months. Elena smiled as she scheduled their first joint planning meeting. The last problem was the research team. Scientists from 5 different species wanted to study how to make better starship engines. But they could not agree on anything. The logical synthetics wanted to use pure mathematics. The emotional empaths wanted to study how the engines affected the feelings of pilots. The artistic sculptors wanted to make engines that were beautiful as well as functional. Elena brought them all together in a large meeting room. She listened to each group explain their ideas. Then she asked a simple question. What if you were all right? The scientists looked confused. How could they all be right when their ideas were so different? Elena explained her thinking. Mathematics tells us what is possible. Understanding emotions tells us what is safe and comfortable for pilots. Beauty makes people proud of their work and want to do their best. Why not combine all these approaches? The scientists began to see her point. Over the next several meetings, they created a research plan that included all their different ideas. The mathematical models would be tested by pilots in emotional comfort studies, and the final designs would be created with artistic input. This was what humans did best. They saw connections where others saw only differences. They built bridges between species that had never worked together before. They turned enemies into friends and competitors into partners. As Elena finished her work for the day, she looked out at the stars. The galaxy was huge, full of billions of different creatures. Before humans arrived, it had been a place of constant conflict. Now it was becoming something better, a place where all beings could work together toward common goals. She did not know that some species saw human tolerance as weakness. She did not know that there were those who thought humans were too trusting, too willing to help others. She could not imagine that anyone would ever test the limits of human patience. Elena believed in the goodness of all intelligent beings. She believed that understanding and cooperation could solve any problem. She believed that with enough time and effort, all species could learn to live together in peace. She was right about most species, but not all of them. The Krethak ship arrived at Alpha 7 on a quiet Tuesday morning. It was unlike any vessel the Council had seen before. The hull was covered with strange bumps and ridges that pulsed with soft blue light. Arrays of thin, needle-like sensors stuck out from every surface. Elena Vasquez stood in the docking bay, waiting to greet them. As the human ambassador, she always met new species when they first joined the Galactic Council. It was her job to help them feel welcome and understand how things worked. The airlock hissed open, and 3 Krethaks stepped out. They were tall and thin, with gray skin that looked slightly damp. Their heads were larger than human heads, with 4 black eyes arranged in a square pattern. Most strange of all, thin wires grew from their skulls like metal hair. The lead Krethak approached Elena. When it spoke, the wires on its head glowed softly. I am Research Leader Zethan. We bring greetings from the Krethak Collective to this gathering of minds. Elena smiled and bowed slightly. Welcome to the Galactic Council. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez. I will help you learn our ways and introduce you to the other species. Zethan's 4 eyes studied Elena carefully. The wires on its head pulsed faster. We have heard much about humans. Your species is set to work well with all others. This interests us greatly. Over the next few weeks, Elena showed the Krethek around the station. She introduced them to representatives from dozens of different species. She explained the Council's rules and helped them set up their first trade agreements that the Krethek seemed grateful for her help. They asked many questions about human culture and history. They wanted to know how humans had learned to get along with so many different species. They seemed especially interested in how humans handled stress and conflict. Your people remain calm even when others are angry, Zethan observed during one of their meetings. This is unusual. Most species respond to aggression with aggression. Elena nodded. We learned long ago that fighting usually makes problems worse. It is better to stay calm and look for solutions that help everyone. The wires on Zethan's head glowed brighter. Fascinating. And you can maintain this calm behavior even under great pressure? Most of the time, Elena said. We are not perfect, but we try to be patient and understanding. What Elena did not know was that the Krethek had not come to Alpha 7 just to join the Council. They were scientists, but not the kind that studied stars or planets. They studied consciousness itself. On their homeworld, they had spent centuries learning how different minds worked by connecting their wire hair directly to the brains of other creatures. The Krethek had tested every animal on their planet. They had mapped the neural patterns of simple creatures and complex ones. They understood how pain and fear and joy worked in the brain. But they had never found a species like humans before. Zethan returned to the Krethek ship that evening and connected his wire hair to the main computer. Instantly, his mind joined with the other research leaders of his species. The human neural patterns are unlike anything in our database, he reported to the collective consciousness. They show remarkable stability under social pressure. Their brain chemistry remains balanced even when other species become hostile or unreasonable. This could be valuable data, came the response from the homeworld. Begin careful observation protocols. We must understand how this mental stability works. And if they discover our research, Zethan asked, they will not. Their own data shows they assume good intentions in all other species. They will interpret our actions in the most positive way possible. This makes them perfect subjects for extended study. The next day, Zethan began the experiments. They started small. During a trade meeting between humans and the aggressive spike shell species, Zethan used his ship's sensors to release a chemical into the air. The chemical was odorless and harmless, but it made the spike shells more irritable than usual. Elena was running the meeting, trying to help both species agree on mineral rights. The spike shells began shouting and clicking their claws together angrily. In the past, this would have made other species shout back or walk away from the negotiations, but Elena remained calm. She spoke in a steady, quiet voice. She offered the spike shells water and asked if they needed a break. When they continued to be aggressive, she patiently restated each side's position and looked for ways to compromise. Zethan's equipment recorded everything. The sensors tracked Elena's brain patterns, heart rate, and stress hormones. The data was amazing. Even as the spike shells became more and more hostile, Elena's body and mind stayed remarkably stable. Increase the stress factors, came the command from the Krethek homeworld. The experiments grew larger. During a council session about food distribution, Zethan's team used sound waves that only humans could hear. The sounds were designed to cause anxiety and make thinking difficult. Most species would have become confused and angry. Elena felt the effects. Her head started to ache, and she felt worried for no clear reason, but she did not let it show. She continued leading the meeting. helping different species work out there. Disagreements about who would get food aid and who would provide it. The other human ambassadors at the meeting felt the effects too. They looked tired and stressed, but they kept working. They stayed polite and helpful even as their invisible discomfort grew worse. Remarkable, Zethan reported to his collective. Even under direct neural interference, they maintain cooperative behaviors. Their stress levels are rising, but they continue to prioritize group harmony over individual comfort. The Krefak homeworld was excited by this data. They had never seen a species that could function so well under pressure. Most creatures, when stressed, became selfish and aggressive. Humans seemed to become more focused on helping others. We need more data, the homeworld decided. Find ways to create greater stress. Test their limits. We must understand how far this stability extends. Zethan agreed, but he needed a better testing ground than the space station. Too many other species might notice if the experiments became too obvious. He needed somewhere with only humans, where the Krefak could work without interference. That was when he learned about the human colonies. Humans had settled on dozens of planets across the galaxy. Some of these colonies were small and isolated, far from the main trade routes. They would be perfect places to conduct more detailed research. Zethan submitted a request to the Galactic Council's Ethics Committee. He proposed a study of how different species adapted to life on frontier planets. He said the Krefak wanted to learn about agriculture, community building, and resource management. All of it was technically true, just not the whole truth. Elena herself reviewed the proposal. It seemed like a good project. The Krefak were new to the council and wanted to learn from other species' experiences. She approved the research and even suggested some human colonies that might be willing to participate. The colony on Kepler-4, 42b, would be perfect, she told Zethan. They have been struggling with some farming problems lately. They could probably use help from scientists with your expertise. Zethan's wires glowed with satisfaction. A struggling colony would already be under stress. That would make it easier to conduct more intensive experiments without the humans realizing what was happening to them. "Thank you, Ambassador Vasquez," he said. "Your assistance is most valuable to our research." Elena smiled. "I am happy to help. I hope your studies go well." She had no idea what kind of studies the Krefak really planned to conduct. She could not imagine that any species would deliberately cause suffering just to gather data. In her mind, all intelligent beings were fundamentally good and wanted to help each other. This belief would soon be tested in ways she never thought possible. The Krefak ship departed for Kepler 442b 3 days later, its hull sensors already recording everything they could about human neural patterns. In the research labs, alien scientists prepared instruments that could measure pain, fear, and desperation with perfect accuracy. They were about to learn just how much pressure it took to break human patience. They thought they were conducting a simple scientific experiment. They had no idea they were lighting a fuse. The colony on Kepler-4, 42b had been humanity's pride for over 30 years. 50,000 people lived there, working together to turn a dead world into a garden. They had built cities under protective domes, created farms that fed the entire system, and raised families in peace. But 3 months ago, everything had started going wrong. Governor Sarah Chen stood in her office, looking out at the main colony dome. What should have been green fields full of growing crops was now brown and dying. The blight had come suddenly, killing entire harvests in days. Without food, the colonists had to depend on supplies shipped from other worlds. Those supply ships came through trade routes, controlled by the Crete HAK. Sarah did not suspect anything at first. The Krefak had been helpful when they arrived to study the colony. They offered to manage the food shipments since their ships were already traveling to nearby systems. They set up research stations to study how humans adapted to life on frontier worlds. They even helped distribute supplies when the blight got worse. Dr. James Park, the colony's chief medical officer, was the first to notice the pattern. "Governor, we need to talk," he said as he entered Sarah's office. His face was pale, and dark circles surrounded his eyes. "What is it, James?" Sarah asked. She had known him for 10 years. She had never seen him look so worried. "It is about the sickness," he said, sitting down heavily. "At first I thought it was just stress from the food shortages. People were getting headaches, stomach problems, trouble sleeping. Normal reactions to a crisis." Sarah nodded. But it is getting worse. And it is following a pattern." James pulled out his tablet and showed her charts and graphs. "The sickness always starts right after we get new food shipments. And it affects children more than adults." Sarah looked at the data. There were peaks of illness every time a Krethak supply ship arrived. The sick days would last about a week, then people would start feeling better. Then another ship would come, and the cycle would repeat. "Are you saying the food is contaminated?" Sarah asked. "I think so. But every time I tested, the contamination is different. Sometimes it is a chemical that causes nausea. Sometimes it is something that affects the nervous system. Sometimes it is a biological agent that triggers immune responses." Sarah felt a cold feeling in her stomach. Why would the contamination keep changing? James met her eyes. "Because someone is doing this on purpose. They are testing different things to see how we react." The next day, Sarah tried to contact the Krethak research team. She found research leader Zethan at one of their monitoring stations outside the colony dome. "We are having problems with contaminated food," she told him. "Our people are getting sick after every delivery." Zethan's HFY glowed softly. His 4 eyes looked at her with what seemed like concern. "This is troubling news. Have you identified the source of the contamination?" "We think it might be happening during transport," Sarah said. "Could there be a problem with your cargo holds? Maybe chemical leaks or biological growth?" "We will investigate immediately," Zethan said. "The safety of your colony is very important to our research. Sick subjects provide less useful data." Sarah felt relief. She had been worried that the Krethak might be offended by the suggestion that their ships were causing problems. But Zethan seemed genuinely concerned and willing to help. What she did not see was the way. Zethan's wires pulsed with excitement after she left. The contamination was not an accident. It was the whole point. In their hidden laboratory, the Krethak had been carefully designing each batch of contaminated food. They wanted to see how humans responded to different types of stress: physical pain, mental confusion, fear, exhaustion. Each contamination was chosen to trigger specific responses. The results fascinated them. Even as people got sicker, the humans continued to work together. They shared their dwindling supplies of clean food. They took care of each other's children. The medical staff worked 20-hour days trying to help everyone, even when they were sick themselves. Increase the pressure. Came the order from the Krethak homeworld. "We need to find their breaking point." The next contamination was worse. Instead of just making people feel sick, the Krethak added chemicals that caused intense anxiety and paranoia. They wanted to see if they could make the humans turn on each other. 8-year-old Lucy Martinez was one of the first to show symptoms. She woke up screaming from nightmares and refused to leave her mother's side. Other children started having similar reactions. They became afraid of shadows, convinced that monsters were hiding everywhere. But instead of creating chaos, the fear brought the humans closer together. Parents organized group sleeping areas where children could feel safe. Teachers created special calm-down spaces in schools. The whole colony worked together to help the frightened kids. The Krethak monitoring equipment recorded it all. The children's brain scans showed extreme distress, but the adults maintained protective behaviors despite their own fear and exhaustion. Fascinating, Zethan reported to his collective. Even when experiencing chemically induced terror, they prioritize care of their young above all else. The stress seems to trigger stronger cooperative instincts, not weaker ones. But the homeworld was not satisfied. The children are a key variable. Focus experiments on them directly. If human protective instincts are so strong, test those limits. The next contamination targeted the children specifically. The Krethak designed a compound that was harmless to adult humans, but toxic to developing nervous systems. It would not kill the children, but it would cause severe pain and developmental problems. 12 children died in the first week. Dr. Park worked without sleep trying to save them. He had identified the cause, a neurotoxin that attacked growing brain tissue, but he could not stop it. The poison was designed too cleverly, hidden in nutrients that children needed to survive. "We have to stop taking the food shipments," he told Governor Chen. "This is not contamination. This is deliberate poisoning." Sarah wanted to agree, but she looked at the supply charts. Without the Krethak shipments, the colony would run out of food in less than 2 weeks. The Blag had destroyed their emergency reserves. They had no choice but to keep accepting the contaminated supplies and hope Dr. Park could find a way to counteract the poisons. The Krethak watched the humans' impossible choice with scientific interest. The monitoring equipment recorded new types of brain activity as parents fed their children food they knew might hurt them, because the alternative was letting them starve. "Remarkable adaptation," Zethan observed. "They are willingly accepting certain harm to avoid potential greater harm." The risk assessment calculations are incredibly complex. But some of the Krethak researchers were beginning to feel uncomfortable with the experiments. One of them, a junior scientist named Vethra, approached Zethan with concerns. "Research leader, the death rate among the young subjects is increasing beyond acceptable parameters," she said. "Perhaps we should reduce the toxicity levels." Zethan's wire hair flashed with annoyance. The homeworld has specifically requested data on extreme stress responses. Dead subjects provide valuable information about the limits of human protective behaviors. "But they are suffering unnecessarily," Vethra protested. "We have already gathered extensive data on their cooperative instincts." "Suffering is the point," Zethan said coldly. "How can we understand their mental processes without pushing them to their limits? The humans claim to value life and cooperation above all else. We are testing whether that is really true or just comfortable rhetoric." Vethra left the conversation feeling disturbed, but she did not report her concerns. The collective consciousness of the Krethak homeworld had approved these experiments. Who was she to question the wisdom of the greater mind? By the end of the second month, 43 children had died. The adults were barely functioning, surviving on 2 hours of sleep per night and food that made them constantly ill. But they had not broken. They continued to care for their children, to share resources, to work together. The Krethak had found the limits of human physical endurance, but they had not found the limits of human compassion. This puzzled them. Every other species they had studied would have devolved into chaos by now. "Perhaps we need a different approach," the homeworld suggested. "Instead of just observing their responses to stress, we should make our role more obvious. Let them know they are being studied. See how they react to the knowledge that their suffering has purpose." Zethan agreed. The next morning, he arrived at the colony with a team of researchers carrying new monitoring equipment. They set up sensors throughout the residential areas, devices that would record everything the humans said and did. "What is all this equipment for?" Governor Chun asked. "Enhanced data collection," Zethan explained. "We want to study how your community responds to crisis." Your colony is providing valuable information about human adaptability. Sarah stared at him. You are studying us? While our children are dying. Of course, Zethan said, seeming puzzled by her tone. This crisis provides a unique opportunity to observe human behavior under extreme stress. The data we collect here will advance scientific understanding significantly. For the first time in months, Sarah Chun felt something besides exhaustion and despair. She felt anger, hot and bright, burning in her chest. But she pushed it down. The colony needed the Crefalina Vasquez read the message from Kepler 442b at exactly 14:23 station time. Her aide, Marcus, found her 20 minutes later still sitting at her desk, staring at the screen with an expression he had never seen before. Ambassador? Marcus said quietly. The trade delegation from Proxima is waiting for their meeting. Elena did not look up from the screen. Cancel it, ma'am. Cancel all my meetings. Send messages to every human ship captain, every human colony administrator, every human representative in council space. Tell them to report to their nearest communication station immediately for priority transmission. Marcus had worked with Elena for 8 years. He had seen her handle impossible negotiations, deal with hostile alien species, and solve problems that seemed unsolvable. But he had never heard her voice sound like this, cold and sharp as broken glass. What should I tell them the transmission is about? He asked. Elena finally looked up. Her eyes were different somehow, as if something warm behind them had been switched off. Tell them it is about children. Within 6 hours, every human in the galaxy was connected to the same communication network. Colony governors paused their work to listen. Ship captains stopped their vessels in space. Even humans living alone on research stations or trading posts found ways to join the conversation. Elena sat in the main communication center of Alpha 7. Around her, screens showed the faces of thousands of humans across the galaxy. She had called them together for something that had never happened before in human history. A species-wide meeting. 47 days ago, she began. The colony on Kepler 442b began experiencing what appeared to be accidental food contamination. Today, I received confirmation that this contamination was deliberate. The Krethik have been systematically poisoning our people, including children, as part of a scientific experiment. The faces on the screens changed. Elena watched as expressions of disbelief turned to understanding, then to something harder and colder. 61 children are dead, she continued. The Krethak have been recording their pain and our responses for research purposes. When I requested permission to investigate, the Galactic Council denied my request. They said I was too emotionally involved to be objective. Captain Rodriguez of the trading vessel Esperanza spoke first. What are your orders, Ambassador? Elena was quiet for a long moment. She thought about all the years she had spent building bridges between species. She thought about the peace treaties she had negotiated, the trade agreements she had written, the friendships she had fostered between beings who had once been enemies. All of that work had been built on one fundamental belief, that all intelligent species wanted to live together in harmony, that underneath their different shapes and cultures, all beings shared basic decency and respect for life. The Krethak had proven that belief wrong. As of this moment, Elena said, all human cooperation with the Galactic Council is suspended. Every human ship will return to human space. Every human representative will withdraw from Council stations. All trade agreements involving human goods or services are canceled. Dr. Susan Walsh, who ran the human research station on the edge of the galaxy, raised her hand. Ambassador, what about the mixed species projects? I have been working with Delphian scientists for 3 years. Our research could save millions of lives. All projects are suspended, Elena said. No exceptions, but the medical research no exceptions. Elena's voice was final. The galaxy has chosen to treat humanity as test subjects. We will no longer participate in galactic civilization until that changes. The implications of Elena's order were staggering. Humans were involved in every major aspect of galactic society. They ran half the trade routes, mediated most diplomatic agreements, and provided crucial services to dozens of species. Their sudden withdrawal would cause chaos across the galaxy. Commander Jackson, who led the human defense fleet, asked the question everyone was thinking. What about Kepler 442b? What about our people who are still suffering? Elena's expression became even colder. That situation will be resolved. She did not explain what she meant by resolved, but every human on the communication network understood. They had all grown up hearing stories about humanity's past, about the wars their ancestors had fought before they learned to value peace. Those stories were about to become relevant again. The meeting ended with a simple message, sent to every human in the galaxy. Come home. Within 24 hours. The greatest migration in galactic history began. Human ships changed course from dozens of systems, all heading toward human space. Space stations that had operated for decades suddenly found their human staff gone. Research projects that had taken years to plan were abandoned overnight. The Delphian ambassador tried to reach Elena, but her office said she was unavailable. The Zaxta trade minister offered to pay double their usual rates for human shipping services, but received no response. Even the residents, who rarely spoke to other species, attempted to contact human representatives. All human communication channels had gone silent. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from over 100 species gathered to discuss the human withdrawal. Many of them were angry, demanding that the humans be forced to honor their agreements. Others were confused, unable to understand why humans would abandon their role as galactic mediators. The Krethek representative, research leader Zethan, seemed unconcerned. This reaction was predictable, he told the council. Humans exhibit strong protective responses when their offspring are threatened. This withdrawal is simply another data point in our ongoing study. Your study has destroyed galactic stability, shouted the thermopod representative. Without human mediation, half our trade agreements are meaningless. The pursuit of knowledge sometimes requires sacrifice, Zetham replied. The data we have gathered about human psychology will benefit all species for generations. But as the days passed, strange reports began reaching the council. Human ships were not just withdrawing to human space. They were doing other things as well. The Krethek research station in the Vega system went dark. All communication ceased. When a council investigation team arrived, they found the station intact but empty. Every piece of equipment had been removed. Every data file had been deleted. Even the coffee in the break room was gone. Similar reports came from other systems. Krethek facilities were being systematically emptied, always without violence, always with surgical precision. The alien researchers simply disappeared, along with all their work. Where are our people? Demanded the Krethek representative at the next council session. No human was present to answer. The disappearances continued. Within 2 weeks, every Krethek research facility in the galaxy had gone silent. The species' homeworld sent increasingly desperate messages, but received no replies. They tried to track the human ships that had visited each facility, but the vessels seemed to vanish as soon as they finished their work. On Kepler 442b, Governor Sarah Chun received a message that consisted of only 2 words: pack everything. 3 hours later, human ships appeared in the system. They were not the usual trade vessels or passenger transports. These ships were larger, more purposeful. They had the look of vessels designed for serious work. The evacuation took 18 hours. Every human on Kepler 442b was loaded onto the ships, along with their possessions, their equipment, even their pets. The colony that had taken 30 years to build was abandoned in less than a day dot as the ships prepared to leave. Sarah stood on the bridge of the lead vessel. Through the view screen, she could see the Krethak research stations still operating on the planet's surface. The alien scientists were probably still analyzing the data they had collected from months of human suffering. "Governor," the ship's captain said, "we are ready to depart." Sarah nodded. "Take us home." As the human fleet left the system, explosions bloomed behind them. The Krethak research stations were gone, reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Every scrap of data they had collected about human responses to torture had been destroyed, but the Krethak researchers themselves had vanished hours before the explosions. Like their colleagues at every other facility, they had simply disappeared. Across the galaxy, species that had depended on human services struggled to maintain their civilizations. Trade routes collapsed. Diplomatic agreements fell apart. Research projects ground to a halt. The Galactic Council met in continuous session, trying to find solutions to the crisis. But without human mediators, old conflicts resurged. The Scare and Delphians resumed their ancient hatred. The thermal pods and gas breathers stopped speaking to each other entirely. "We must demand the humans' return," shouted the Chitauri representative. "They have obligations to the galactic community." "With what authority?" asked the Aviari delegate. "They have withdrawn from all treaties. Legally, they owe us nothing. Then we will force them to return." "With whose military?" The human defense fleet was the strongest in the galaxy. The council members looked at each other with growing unease. They were beginning to realize how completely they had depended on human cooperation. Without it, their civilization was falling apart, but the humans remained silent. Their ships patrolled the borders of human space. The Krethak homeworld had been silent for 7 days. The massive planet orbited a red dwarf star at the edge of council space. For over 50 years, it had been a hub of scientific activity, with research ships coming and going constantly. Now nothing moved in the system, except automated defense satellites that no longer responded to signals. Admiral Vexstar of the Galactic Council, Defense Force, led a fleet of 12 ships toward the planet. Representatives from 6 different species watched nervously from the bridge of his flagship as they approached the mysterious world. "Any response to our communications?" the Admiral asked. "Nothing, sir," reported his communications officer, a young Delphian whose tentacles trembled with anxiety. "All frequencies are dead. Even the automatic identification beacons have stopped broadcasting." The fleet moved closer to the planet. Through their view screens, they could see the vast cities that covered the surface. Towering spires of crystal and metal stretched toward the sky. Networks of transportation tubes connected different areas. Everything looked perfectly normal from a distance, but as they entered orbit, the details became clearer. The cities were intact, but nothing was moving. No vehicles traveled the roads. No ships flew between the buildings. The entire planet looked like a photograph, beautiful, detailed, and completely lifeless. "Sir," called the sensor operator, "I am detecting massive power usage in the main research complex. Something is still operating down there." Admiral Vexstar made a decision. "Prepare landing teams. We need to know what happened here." 3 shuttles descended to the surface, carrying investigators from different species. They landed in the central plaza of the main city, where the Krethak government buildings stood. The buildings were undamaged, their doors standing open as if waiting for residents to return. But the residents were gone. The investigation teams split up to search different areas. In government offices, they found desks with work still scattered across them. Meals sat half-finished in restaurants. Personal belongings lay abandoned in living spaces. But of the Krethak themselves, there was no trace. It was as if an entire species had simply vanished. Dr. Yennekorth, a forensic specialist from the aviary species, examined one of the research laboratories. Her bird-like features twisted in confusion as she studied the equipment. "There are no signs of struggle," she reported over the communication system. "No damage to the facilities. No indication of violence or panic. The Krethik seemed to have just left. Left for where?" asked Admiral Vexstar from orbit. "Unknown, sir. But they took nothing with them. Their equipment is still here. Their research data is still in the computers. Even their personal items are undisturbed." The most disturbing discovery came from the main research center. The team investigating it found hundreds of monitoring stations, each one designed to record and analyze the neural patterns of other species. Banks of computers contained detailed studies of pain responses, fear reactions, and psychological breaking points. Most of the research focused on humans. "Admiral," reported Captain Zont, a Thethar officer leading the research center team, "you need to see this. The Krethek have been conducting experiments on captured subjects for decades. The investigation team found holding cells designed for different species. The cells were empty now, but medical equipment nearby suggested they had been used recently. Analysis chambers contained instruments for measuring brain activity during extreme stress. Files in the computers described experiments that would have been considered torture by any civilized standard. "Sir," Dr. Korth called from another section of the complex, "I found something else. There are signs of recent human presence here." She led the team to a large chamber deep in the research complex. The room was completely empty except for a single piece of equipment in the center, a Krethak neural interface device. The kind they used to connect their wire hair to computer systems. But this device had been modified. New components had been added, components that no one could identify. The entire interface glowed with a soft, pulsing light that seemed almost alive. "What do you think it does?" asked Captain Zont. "I have no idea," Dr. Korth replied. "But I think we should leave it alone." The investigation teams returned to their ships with more questions than answers. The Krethik had vanished without explanation. Their planet was intact but empty. The only sign of what had happened was the modified neural interface device. Sitting alone in the depths of their research complex, Admiral Vexstar compiled a report for the Galactic Council, but he kept his own suspicions private. The precision of the operation, the complete absence of violence, the surgical removal of an entire species, it all reminded him of stories he had heard about human military operations from centuries past. But humans were not supposed to have that kind of capability anymore. They were diplomats and traders, not warriors. Or so everyone had believed. 30-6 days after the discovery of the empty Krethak homeworld, human ships began returning to galactic space. They appeared without warning at major trade stations and diplomatic centers. The crews were polite and professional, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. Elena Vasquez returned to her office on Alpha 7 on a Tuesday morning. She walked through the corridors with the same calm confidence she had always shown. Species representatives who saw her tried to approach with questions, but she simply nodded politely and continued to her office. At 10 o'clock station time, she sent a message to all council members. Human participation in galactic affairs will resume under revised terms. New protocols for interaction will be distributed shortly. The revised terms were simple but absolute. Any species found conducting experiments on sentient beings without consent would be immediately expelled from council space. Any species that threatened human colonies or citizens would face immediate sanctions. And any species that harmed human children would be removed from the galaxy entirely. No one asked what removed from the galaxy meant. The fate of the Krethak made that clear enough. The Galactic Council accepted the new terms without debate. They were desperate to restore the stability that only human mediation could provide. Trade resumed, diplomatic agreements were renewed, and the galaxy slowly returned to normal functioning. But everything had changed. The other species no longer saw humans as harmless bridge builders. They treated human representatives with a mixture of respect and fear that had never existed before. When humans offered suggestions, other species listened carefully and followed them exactly. Elena noticed the change immediately. In meetings, alien delegates watched her with nervous attention. They agreed to proposals much more quickly than before. Even species that had been difficult to work with in the past suddenly became cooperative and reasonable. During a trade negotiation with the spike shells, their representative actually apologized for speaking too loudly. The same species that had once shouted and clicked their claws aggressively now whispered their proposals and waited patiently for human approval. "Is there something wrong?" Elena asked the spike shell delegate. "You seem unusually subdued." The alien's claws clicked nervously. "We wish to maintain positive relations with humanity, Ambassador. We understand that humans value peaceful negotiation." Elena studied the spike shell's tense posture. "Yes, we do. But we also value honesty. You can speak normally. I will not take offense." "We appreciate your patience," the delegate said, still speaking quietly. "We know that human tolerance has limits." That phrase, "human tolerance has limits," had become common throughout the galaxy. Species that had once tested human patience now went out of their way to avoid causing any problems. Disputes that would have required weeks of negotiation were resolved in hours, with all parties eager to avoid any action that might be interpreted as threatening to humanity. The change was especially noticeable when discussions involved children. Any proposal that might affect young beings of any species was examined with extreme care. Representatives would spend hours debating minor details to ensure nothing could possibly be interpreted as harmful to children. Elena found this new dynamic both useful and disturbing. Negotiations were certainly easier when everyone was eager to cooperate. But she missed the honest disagreements and passionate debates that had once made her job challenging and interesting. More troubling was the way other species had begun to distance themselves from any research that involved studying other intelligent beings. Psychological research had nearly stopped. Anthropological studies were conducted with layers of ethical oversight that made meaningful work almost impossible. The scientific community was terrified of being accused of conducting Krethek-style experiments. During a council session about medical research standards, the thermal pod representative made a telling comment. "We want to ensure that our research benefits all species, not studies them like laboratory animals." The way he said, "studies them," made it clear that this phrase had become associated with the ultimate taboo. No one wanted to risk being compared to the Krethek. Elena understood that this was probably for the best. Research should benefit subjects, not exploit them. But she also worried about the chilling effect on legitimate scientific inquiry. More than anything, she was disturbed by the questions no one dared to ask.